Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you for being at the World Staffing Summit. We are back on stage now with the next panel. We have Nick, Jonathan, Marlon, and Matt here, who will be talking about how online staffing platforms will replace the traditional staffing model. Enjoy the session, ask your questions in the chat, and I'm handing over to Nick to take it over.
Thank you, Jan. Good morning for all of those that are on the West Coast. I'm dialing in from rainy San Francisco. It's good to be with you here. My name is Nick Ellis. I work for Amazon Web Services and come from about a 13-year history building and operating staffing companies myself. I wanted to take a moment and introduce the panel here. We've got Matt, Marlon, and Jonathan all joining us, and I'm going to ask them in that order to just take 30 seconds or so and tell you a little bit about themselves and their business. And then we're going to jump into a quick agenda, largely full of Q&A, and we'll look forward to many of your questions at the end here. Matt, do you want to take a moment, just introduce what you're up to and how you've been involved in the staffing industry?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Appreciate the time and the opportunity. Excited to be here. My name is Matt Pierce. I'm the co-founder of Trusted Health. I've been in the staffing industry my entire career. So I started at Tech Systems, an Allegis Group company, then transitioned to the world of tech and startups at Hired.com. And about a little less than 4 years ago, started Trusted Health with my co-founder, Lenny. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Marlon, you want to share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Marlon Rosenzweig, co-founder and CEO of WorkGenius. I'm originally from Germany, was educated in England, started the company in Germany though, and then brought it over to New York, and now have fled, due to the pandemic, to Miami. So I'm enjoying the sun down here. And we've been doing this for 8 years now. So we've seen sort of, the ups and downs and the trends in the industry, which has been very exciting.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining today, Marlon. And then Jonathan, please take a moment to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Really excited to be here. John Kestenbaum. I'm the co-founder, managing director of Talent Tech Labs. We are a research and advisory firm focused on helping companies go through a digital transformation in, HR. I'm actually a lawyer by education, unfortunately, but I spent my whole career in the HR tech space. First as a builder, I built and sold a talent acquisition technology company, and now as an advisor / investor to talent acquisition technology companies. So really excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks all. And again, just for those in the audience, we're going to cover just a couple quick topics today, excuse me. First, we're going to spend a few minutes on what's working out there in the online staffing market and talk about a few examples to locate everybody in time and place. Then we're going to turn a little bit to the economics and some of the challenges, the risks and barriers that a lot of traditional staffing firms encounter when they try and take their business online. Hopefully leave you with a few key insights around that. And ultimately, we're going to leave a little bit of time for your Q&A at the end. So with that as the agenda, I'd love to tee it off. Marlon, you and Matt both operate a staffing platform loosely. I know there's many flavors of staffing platforms, but at the highest level, you've had a lot of experience out there selling against competitors, seeing what works, what doesn't. I'm curious, in your eyes, maybe Marlon, speak with you first, who is doing online staffing solutions well out there, and why? What are they doing that sets them apart from some of the other folks that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think there's two things how we evaluate competitors, and I think that's probably how the buyer thinks about it, like the end company that's approaching a staffing firm. And one is sort of payment and compliance, right? I think why people turn to staffing firms as opposed to hiring people directly is sort of the extra flexibility that you gain. I think a lot of this has been automated. There's sort of room for optimization, which I think MBO Partners is doing fairly well, where you can sort of decide whether you want to do 1099 or W2, and then sort of depending on the profile and the behavior, you can really sort of optimize the type of engagement at the end of the day. I think the big topic that people should be talking about more is sort of talent selection, right? I think the overhead that the staffing firm takes on to find you the right talent, to do the initial vetting, which is, pre-pandemic, we had, historically low unemployment numbers. It was extremely hard. I dare to say that probably in certain pockets of the market, the unemployment has not gone up, right? Even though the overall market tends to suggest that sort of, unemployment, there's more than 4 million people unemployed right now. When it comes to automating that part of the process, I think there's a lot of online staffing platforms out there that are almost working like, like a mechanical Turk, where they're saying this is automated, but it's people on the back end really doing the work. And you can see that shine through, at least for the public companies and their gross margin profiles. So I think that is something that you really need to look out for when you look at sort of how good are the capabilities really of that staffing firm to find you the good talent. Because as an end user, you don't want a list of 250 candidates that could potentially start on Monday, right? That's of no help. That's like, it's a nightmare for any hiring manager. So I think that, without going into too much detail, but I think there's a couple of companies that do this well, and there's a couple of companies that sort of, I'm not saying it's deceptive, but they say it's automated and it's really sort of, humans doing the work in the back end, which is, not really an online staffing firm, if you ask me. I think we just lost our moderator.
Yeah, I think we just lost Nick, but
Matt, why don't you go next? Yeah, and then I'll take over.
I'll follow up, and hopefully Nick can figure some things out in the meantime. But Marlon, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think to provide like a tangible example, one company, which is an earlier stage startup that I've been getting really excited about, is a company called Kudo, actually. And wanted to provide this example because they don't identify as a staffing company or a staffing platform. They're actually a multilingual video or web conferencing solution, but they have actually a labor marketplace of interpreters that power their platform, right? And the reason why I point that out is because I've been really fascinated recently by how close can you as a staffing platform, or you as a company, how close can you get to like the point of origin of the staffing need? And as an example, Kudo, they have a web conferencing platform. They also have APIs and plugins. At any point, if we wanted to broadcast what we were saying in a different language, you could click on the Kudo plugin and change the language, and you have a labor marketplace in the background that's interpreting that in a different language. So that the closeness to the point of origin is, I think, really fascinating and interesting. Like, we as staffing solutions need to think about, where does the demand come from? Where is the specificity of the need originate from? And how close can we get to the workflow to make it seamless to ultimately create that need and fulfill that need in the quickest time possible? Kudo was one example that I thought just represented some of what was interesting. There's another company, early stage trucking staffing company called Hall, which is diving into the logistics space and, coming out of that, doing trucking staffing in a very, very interesting way. So those are all just some interesting examples. I'll take off my trusted hat for a second and use some other ones.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thanks. Just to confirm, are you all able to hear me again? Sorry, I got dropped for a moment. Great, cool.
No worries.
You bring up an interesting point there, Matt, that figuring out where the point of origin is for that staffing relationship is really critical, and being as close to that customer as possible is really critical. One thing that I've noticed in my years is that brick and mortar or offline staffing agencies, old world staffing agencies, have oftentimes owned those relationships. And it's been harder for platforms to break in, to get close to the customer, have the credibility, and then ultimately easily transact. I'm curious, Jonathan, in particular, from your view, you do a great wide survey of what's going on out there in the industry. Are there examples of offline or brick and mortar old world staffing agencies that have successfully evolved their model to stay close to the customer when they go online? Or do you see these as kind of two different staffing models entirely, and it's more about how you mix and match them?
Yeah, great question. So I want to take a step back and just kind of give a framework for how we look at online staffing, just so you guys, because then I could attack it more directly. So you have a traditional staffing firm here on my left, probably your right? We then have e-staffing, which we consider part of online staffing, right? And then we have what we call like deployment platforms, right? And essentially what's happening is you go from high touch, all the way to low touch, like almost, automated systems. And so there are varying degrees to which existing traditional brick and mortar staffing firms are leveraging these tools. You have staffing firms, and I want to be careful not to call out one of my clients who are doing great work. So I'm going to use illustrative examples that everyone knows likely, instead of, because I'm sure a lot of my clients are doing great work around this. So, you look at a company like Adecco that is leveraging Vettery, right? Vettery is an e-staffing platform. So it's kind of like one step closer to an on-demand marketplace where you don't need salespeople. It's self-serve to get access to the candidates. You then look at a company like Randstad with their investment in Twago, right? They are now like a step further, leveraging a temp labor marketplace or a gig platform to deploy candidates into the market. We also, another kind of spin on that is a deployment platform. And so you have companies leveraging, like TrueBlue, leveraging a deployment platform, Swipe Jobs, to deploy their candidates in the market. I think to now answer your question more directly, there's some interesting dynamics at play. First is the end users who you sell to is generally different in these platforms. So traditional staffing firms, usually sell into procurement, right? These platforms, e-staffing or a deployment platform is the end user sometimes, hiring manager, like directly, right? So it changes their sales process a bit, so it makes the dynamics difficult. I think ultimately we don't think everything goes to one of those silos. We think that there's going to be a combination of these different models depending on the type of staffing that you're doing. I would agree. I would argue that technology is going to make its way into the process no matter what, and we're going to have like a race to the middle on leveraging technology. But these different types of technologies to help you deploy talent or engage with the end client, I think are going to exist in different segments of the market. And I would just second, I think that, what Marlon and Matthew said, particularly around matching and just, project-based selling. I also think that's super interesting. And that's, where we're seeing some really interesting innovation on some of these platforms.
Thank you, Jonathan. I like where you ended that point. It kind of leads into my next question, which is, you talked about how these platforms and these services, these tools, whatever you want to call them, as they're incorporated, they change the workflow and some of the core processes. They sometimes change the point of contact that you're dealing with, from compliance or procurement over to the hiring manager. And Marlon, you specifically called out that, for example, in talent selection, it can have a major impact on gross margin. And I've yet to meet a staffing operator that doesn't know, how to track their gross margin down to the penny, their EBITDA. These are things that we know in a very thin margin industry make a big impact. And so I'm curious your views on incorporating these technologies, these platforms and services in. Where is the risk and where's the reward financially? Or logistically, just in terms of integrating it with your back office systems. What have you seen there? Any best practices you might share?
Yeah, I think again, separating this out, I think one is sort of the compliance component, where I think everybody agrees, the paperwork should be done through technology, right? No one needs to run payroll manually. All of this should be automated. And I think optimizing these workflows everybody agrees should be done, and it doesn't really impact the user experience, right? Both on the talent side as well as the client side. If at all, it just gets better. I think coming back to the talent matching, I think that's where it can get dangerous in the sense of you may lose a client, right? So I think there's two questions. One is, how good is the technology to really find that talent, right? And theoretically, and obviously sort of I'm highly biased, but what I would argue is the more data you have, right, the better your decision should become. Machines can analyze data better than humans, right? Which is sort of, you would suspect that technology can make better matches, and obviously because it's technology, it's also faster because it can work through billions of data points, right? But there's something to be said that certain, let's call it chemistry components that you cannot really pinpoint. Humans are extremely good at detecting. Someone being awkward is easy for a human to detect, very difficult for a machine to detect, right? So I think, and this leads to the second point of that matching, the technology may present a candidate to the client that is completely unfit for that role. And then your client may get upset and say, okay, I don't want to work with you anymore because you send me rubbish profiles that don't fit. Has anyone ever talked to these people? This makes no sense. So while we all agree that the gross margin potential improvement is the highest in recruiting, it's also what sets staffing firms apart, right? I think delivering the good candidate to the client is not a commodity, versus compliance and payrolling is a commodity. So I think that's, it's the pride of every staffing firm. And that's also where the gross margin improvements are. But I think, make sure that you have good technology that may even work in hybrid a little bit, still, maybe presents 3 candidates instead of making an instant match that then doesn't work. I think that is sort of where it gets tricky, and that is the risk, because you may see client churn if you don't do it well.
Yeah. Matt, I'm curious your assessment. You work in a slightly more regulated market. Are there different benefits or risks that you've seen for some of these agencies that embrace these new models?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of touch on the original question, I think that the biggest risk and the most cost associated with those traditional agencies trying to make the digital transformation is actually culturally and from like a change management perspective, right? You have companies who've been around for decades, who've built their workflows, their processes, their culture on legacy systems and processes. And when you try and adjust that, that's a really hard thing to do. Even if you're successful in doing it, let's say it takes 24 months or 18 months, that technology that you're implementing, or that tool, or the, whatever form of digital transformation that you're trying to implement might be outdated by the time you do so. So I feel really lucky and fortunate that, we're, building a company that's only 3.5 years old, because we can build on the latest platform, and we don't have the legacy challenges that traditional staffing agencies do. And so that's where it's really interesting to start to see the investment and the M&A from the larger traditional agencies, because they're purchasing that culture and that innovation and kind of incubating it and supporting it with the invaluable knowledge and relationships associated with the larger and legacy the agency models. So for me, it's always touching on the digital transformation isn't a novel idea or concept. 60+% of the Fortune 500 from the last 20 years is gone for a reason, because they were unable to make the digital transformation. And I think, staffing agencies, the best in the business, are going to be able to do that. And it'll be interesting to see, how they execute on it.
Yeah. Can I add to that, Nick?
Please, Jonathan. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So right on, Matt. I totally agree with you. It's exactly what we're seeing with our clients, that being the biggest risk. Some are more, more successful than others at being able to do that. I think one thing that's interesting to highlight around this, again, to take a step back, but to kind of hone in on what we've been talking about is, I think the elephant in the room here is that, these, marketplaces, these gig marketplaces like an Upwork or a freelancer.com or a Twago, and your traditional staffing firm on the far left, like they're very different models going after very different, classes of talent. Like if you put a request out on an Upwork for on-prem traditional contingent labor, like no one's coming to your office, so you're dealing with a different group of talent. I think the holy grail, which is what everyone's trying to go to, is having a self-serve model for on-prem labor, right? So bringing these platforms, and I'm not saying that there's not a world where those platforms work. Those self-serve gig platforms, there is absolutely a world where they work. I would argue that I do think they need to move into the enterprise because I think the lifetime value of the client is actually, you actually lose money in the SMB space with that gig model. But so I think they have to move to the enterprise. But as they move to the enterprise, I think the holy grail is that ability to have W-2, labor delivered in a more self-serve fashion, and maybe on a project basis. And so I think that's, to me, the interesting, thing that we're seeing happen. And you have, folks like Matthew, who's basically started from scratch, building an online first staffing firm, leveraging the best of that. You have, folks like Marlon with technology that enable you to do all of this, right? So I think it's really exciting time as this happens.
But
so
may I ask,
go ahead, Marlon, please,
Jonathan? So I think there were two things, right? You said sort of the online platform versus the traditional staffing firm, and the sort of the main things that distinguish the two is, you said the tax form W-2, right? And the second one, on-prem versus remote. And obviously now everything's remote, right? At least sort of the areas that we are in. So it seems the models are naturally converging. And then if you talk about the tax form, I think we can process W-2 or 1099. It doesn't make a difference to us. We look at the type of engagement that we see, and then we give a recommendation, and the client, according to their risk profile, can say, I want this or this, right? Which I think those things should be fluid almost, right? We see a lot of clients that always go W-2 just because they don't really understand it, right? And that's perfectly fine because they don't want to get into this. But I don't think the main distinction is the tax form or on-prem or remote. For me, from my perspective, it's more, one is sort of the white glove high touch, which is the traditional staffing firm. You get a steak dinner, someone sends you a present at the end of the year, you talk through candidate profiles, all of this, versus the other one is the self-service, which you mentioned, which inherently is, a little bit more cold. But I think those two things, that's really, that dimension, the white glove service versus the self-service, that is the distinction. I think everything else could be congruent, to be honest. The tax firms can be the same, on-prem or remote can be the same, but the layer on top is different. And I think that's, no staffing owner will object to the idea to keep the sales force and they, cultivate the client relationships. If the clients would only then go onto a platform and do the work, that would be fantastic for gross margins, right? Yeah. And I think everybody would agree. And I think as soon as the matching technology is as good as your internal recruiters, as soon as we get to that tipping point where, some of the platforms already are, I think that's where you will see a sort of a converging of those two models, and then, one will prevail.
Yeah, and I just want to say I totally agree with what you're saying. Just to be clear on what I was articulating is, I think it's just historically how these things have evolved, right? So yeah. Historically, these marketplaces started with price arbitrage, overseas labor. They moved to low-skilled labor, and now it's still predominantly marketplaces of folks that you kind of opened my eyes when you said everyone's remote. It's true. I should rethink how I articulate it now, but traditionally been marketplaces of folks that didn't want to have I guess the better way to say it, didn't want to have longer term gigs. They wanted like short term gigs, not longer term projects like the 4 to 6 month projects. And so I agree completely, though, that you're starting to see this convergence accelerated because of, the market we're in.
Which is fantastic for everyone.
There's an interesting theme here I'm hearing. You have the platforms and then you have the people that operate them. And Matthew, you use the term digital transformation. I spend a lot of my days at AWS talking about this with executives and the importance of executive alignment and follow through. I'm curious what each of your observations would be for traditional staffing firms in terms of what types of skills they need to bring into the org, what changes in their people structure they oftentimes encounter. Because my experience has been, you can't just paste the platform on top of the old staffing model. You do lose some recruiters. You refocus on sales. Your compliance and ops lean out a little bit. I guess I'd be curious, what types of internal changes from a team composition perspective or a skill base do you see these traditional staffing firms have to learn or acquire?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of times we, as the experts in the room from a staffing perspective, talk to our clients about upskilling, reskilling their labor force. And I think we really need to think about, if you're a legacy staffing agency, you have a lot of domain knowledge and expertise and great people in your organization. But at the same time, you need to bring in digital expertise in order to stay ahead. And so are you going to completely switch out your workforce, or are you going to upskill and transition your workforce into maybe, a recruiter transitions into a data analyst, right? Or something of that sort. So I think it's something that we need to start bringing people into these legacy staffing models who are, strong from a technological perspective, and we need to start thinking about reskilling and upskilling our current workforce. So it's just one thing that I've noticed. You don't want to kind of switch out the whole organization. There's a lot of value in that culture, but you can't create fear of change and people losing their jobs. So you got to figure out thread the needle there.
Yeah, that change management can be difficult. We've got about 2 more minutes before we're going to be asked to look to take questions. Marlon, Jonathan, I wanted to offer you each about a minute, final thoughts maybe on that question or something else we haven't talked about. And then for folks in the audience, if you want to use the chat function and start to drop your questions in, I'll look for those and we'll be happy to turn to those in just a moment.
Yeah, I would just add, I think, the big questions traditional staffing firms ask themselves is, should we build this technology and become a tech company, or should we buy this technology? And they're always thinking about getting a higher multiple on a sale. And in some cases, you can get a higher multiple on the sale. I would argue that, you're only a technology company if you sell the technology, in the market, like, leveraging technology to lower your operating expenses. You could do that by renting technology, but it depends on the company. But, for the companies that are leveraging, existing technology to streamline their business processes, you need product owners, right? You need someone like inside your organization that's focused as that product, like making sure you're getting the most out of it. You have a direct line of communication with the technology company. I'd argue to be, it's hard to be a tech company, to just be building technology if you haven't done that traditionally. And I think that, a process is the other thing that folks don't realize they need to change. I think that I can't tell you how many companies we've advised to, implement a CRM, and then they call us and say, now what? My recruiters are working 50 recs. Like, what do we do, right? So that's my thoughts. I just want to say high five to you, Nick. I mean, these panels are really great when you have great questions, and I thought you came to the table with some great questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Marlon, parting thought from you, and then again, if folks have questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and I'll start to pull those up. We've got about 10 more minutes here in the session.
Yeah, so I think, Matt, what you said, the transition within a traditional staffing firm, that's a challenge in itself. And I think, also sort of doubling down on what you said, Jonathan, this, building technology is very, very difficult. It may not seem like it from the outside, but it is very, very difficult. It's capital extensive, and I think it may not be underestimated. The only thing I would say, being sort of in the operating field every day, is change takes time. You don't need to convert all of your clients tomorrow to the new platform. Run a hybrid model for a year, run hybrid models for 3 years. Talk to your customers, the ones that want to use the platform, perfect. Give them a little bit of a discount, right? You'll, keep your contribution margins, your gross margins are much, much higher on the platform. You can afford it. Give them all a 10% cut on the hourly rates, and you making more money, the talent's making the same money, and the client is saving money. Everybody's happy, and you will always, you always have like 20, 30% of your clients that are like, no, I like my steak dinners, and I want to pick up the phone, and I want to talk to someone and send an email, and that's fine, right? We don't all drive the same cars, we don't all live in the same houses. I think embracing that is part of the change. I hope I'm making the change look less daunting than it may look if you think about it in black or white scenarios. That's great.
Nick, can I just touch on one thing real quick? We've danced around a little bit, and I just think it's important as leaders of the staffing industry to start talking about this. Is the workforce technology is innovating and changing far faster than policy. And we have to start thinking about this fractional employment model. We've got the number one cause of bankruptcy in our country is medical bills, and 70% of people who have health benefits get them from their employer. And now we have platforms that are facilitating millions of people's employment. And they're really debilitated by that. And if they have something come up, it's a huge challenge. And so I think as we're talking about this innovation, we've got to think about, the 360 view of it and how it impacts our country and our workforce at large. And so I just wanted to plant that there because we've touched on it a little bit, but I think it's an important piece of the equation.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I'd actually be curious to get each of your quick takes. We have a new administration in the U.S. Obviously, labor law has been contentious both at a state level and at a federal level. The 1099 W-2 dichotomy. To your point, there may be a third way. I'd be curious. Maybe Jonathan, start with you, and then Matthew and Marlon. If you could make one recommendation to President Biden and his administration right now to help support the staffing industry or fix what you see as a critical problem, what might it be?
Yeah, so I hate sharing political views publicly, but I am a big supporter of the staffing industry and its growth. And so I would support a lot of the immigration reform that I think Biden's administration wants to do. I think that it's important that we open our borders and allow these workers to get jobs in the U.S.
Matthew, your thought?
Yeah, I'll just double down on what I said. We have to figure out fractional employment. And I think there's really good arguments on both sides of the 1099 and the W-2 space. That's a very binary solution to, a landscape that's ever changing. That's very different from those two binary policies. So we've got to figure it out. It's breaking the system in a lot of different ways. As I mentioned, bankruptcy is caused from medical bills, which is tied to employment insurance. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Marlon? Yeah,
I totally agree with Matt. I think health insurance, especially being a European where everybody has health insurance, and then I come over here and this, I didn't even know this was a topic at first that people talk about. But I think, the data points that I go off from are sort of, freelancers make more money on average than, traditional W-2 employed people. And then as a percentage, freelancers have more health insurance than, normally employed people. So, while I believe we need to solve this, and Biden should, probably nudge health insurance companies to, extend their offers to freelancers a little bit better than they currently are, I I'm a firm believer that the free markets will probably take care of a lot of that stuff. If there's a lot of freelancers, if there's 50 million freelancers that want to buy houses, then banks suddenly figure out how they can underwrite mortgages for freelancers without, W-2 records. It does work. So I think, just providing the freedom for the free market to find solutions for freelancers, that's, I think, all I would ask for.
Yeah, great. We do have a couple questions that have come in, so let me put this one out there and just first come, first serve. I see a question here from Mandeep, and I'll read it aloud. His question was, what happens to MSP or VMS systems who see themselves as tech for staffing agencies going through a digital transformation? So I think the question is, what happens with MSP VMS systems as these platforms become more prolific? Do they stay? Do they merge? Please, anybody who has a comment would welcome it.
Yeah,
we're talking about MSPs.
I would just say, like, this is, Jonathan laid out kind of like the landscape and the convergence previously, and our approach at Trusted Health is we are a technology platform that facilitates the match, and we act as the employer of record and the staffing agency. We look at the MSP and the VMS as partners of ours, right? Like, they are really providing value to us on the demand side of the equation. They have relationships that we don't have. Our core competency and expertise is to really drive candidate acquisition, drive efficiency from a matching perspective, drive efficiency of, marketing lifecycle systems behind it, payroll, et cetera. So I think MSPs and VMSs need to innovate just as staffing agencies do. And the ones that do have definitely a place here. And those staffing platforms who come into the market who might have some ignorance or arrogance to a point where they think that the MSP and VMS is just going to go away. I don't think that's the best way to approach an industry. And I think looking at a rising tide raises all boats, and VMSs and MSPs can definitely be a part of the equation going forward.
Yeah,
any other quick take?
I'll just say that there's significant disruption coming to that space. A lot of the stuff, around direct sourcing, I agree with Matt, like, it's going to exist just in a different form. It's been significantly commoditized, and I do think that there'll be some MSPs that win and some that get disintermediated by potentially like a direct sourcing platform.
Great. Bear with me 1 sec. Let me flick through. We've got a few more comments coming in here. See if there's another question. We have a very technical question I'll ask, and let's see if we have an answer. Coming from Thaddeus, specifically Matthew, I think he said, do you think the public option, parentheses, providing direct consumer access to Medicare, being added to the ACA would assist with the fractional employment concern? Do you have a point of view on that, Matthew?
I don't feel like I'm sophisticated enough in the area to really comment on it in a meaningful way. So I would generally say I would lean towards agreeing that would help, but I'm definitely not an expert in the space.
Okay, all good. We got another question came in from John, and then I think we're coming up on time shortly here. But John's question was, the front office digital transformation from legacy systems has been a hot topic, and it sounds like this team has had a lot of experience with that. He's curious if there are any specific challenges transforming the back office, specifically the pay bill systems. Any insights or experience you might share that you've seen with those systems and changing them over?
Yes, we do a lot of, obviously, transformation work. I'd argue we spend most of our time on the front office. But that being said, there's innovation around the back office, leveraging RPA tools. We call them they're robotic process automation. So being able to take data from one system, run a process on that data, and putting it back into another system. So I think that's where we're seeing the innovation today around back office. There are some really interesting new back office players, but for the most part, folks are taking the existing, especially the larger companies that have to work with the large enterprise players, taking those, layering on some robotic process automation to make things a little more seamless and connect the systems a little better, and they're able to come out on top.
Awesome. Thank you. It looks like we're just at time. I just want to take a moment, Marlon, Matthew, Jonathan, lovely to meet you in a couple instances and to see you again, Jonathan, and just hear the conversation. Obviously a lot of change afoot. I trust people can find you on LinkedIn if they want to follow up directly or reach out. And I'll just thank everyone in the audience today for the time, and look forward to doing this again next year. Hope you have a great week out there.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.